that he's made before. God said, I'm going to send you to deliver my people. And Moses said, well, what if they don't? What if they say you didn't send me? What if they say that I don't have the authority to do this? What if they don't believe me when I tell them? He's always talking about other people's weaknesses, but now he makes an excuse about his weakness. And our own fears and our own weaknesses can hold us back in a lot of ways from a great life. If we don't submit to him, our own fears and weaknesses can hold us back. But we can have a victory over whatever fears, whatever problems we have. We can have a victory if we will go ahead and surrender to him. And Moses is going to have to learn that. See, our weaknesses can be overcome by God's help. Doesn't the Bible say that in our weakness is when he's made strong? In our weakness and our limitations is when God then is able to show, the world is able to see his power. And so this is a little bit different. I'm going to read 3 verses. Each verse, I got a point for each verse, and I've got an illustration for each verse. It normally doesn't work out that way, but it just fell together in that way. So it's very kind of clear cut. And the first thing I want to look at is just verse number 10, okay? Verse number 10, Exodus 4:10. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." I do not hear very well. That's me. I don't hear very well. That is a weakness. The reason why is I'm deaf in one ear and I have damage to the eardrum in the other ear. That's my limitation. See, weaknesses and limitations are 2 separate things. There are certain limitations. Every single one of us have limitations, don't we? We do. There are certain limits to what we can actually do. And those limits can become weaknesses in our lives. And those weaknesses can keep us from fulfilling the work that God has for us to do. God's calling oftentimes seems to go contrary to our strengths. It's not that our strengths that he calls, it's our weaknesses. And a lot of times our weaknesses are based upon our limitations. I don't hear very well, and there's a reason for that. But do you think that God can go past my limitations and go past my limitations? If God wanted me to hear, he could make me hear, couldn't he? If God wanted me to be able to hear, this ear, which right now does not have a nerve attached to it, God could miraculously just build a brand new nerve in my brain and reconnect my ear and refix my cochlea. God could do that. I mean, he can bring people back from the dead. He could do that. So he could fix that limitation. He could take away that weakness. But I learned something. When I lost this ear, when I became weak in that area and I couldn't hear any longer, God did something different. At that point in time, God allowed me to hear his voice more clearly. When I lost that part of my physical ability, God intervened in my life. God came in, and in my weakness, God has given me a strength there. And I'm not saying that I hear everything God says, because most of the time, it goes right over my head. I'm like a blonde. So I had to make sure I was trying not to look at any blondes when I said that. But anyway, I did hear that if you're blonde, your insurance will go down, because your car automatically has a driver's side airhead. It's great. Y'all think about that. Anyway, okay. I mean, I don't hear God's voice all the time. I don't. But I hear him a lot better now than I did before. Used to be, a lot of the noise in the world got my attention. And now I've learned to hear his voice a little clearer in the spiritual realm. I can hear God a little better. And also, because I don't hear as well as I used to, I speak a lot louder and a lot bolder. I've gone back. It's amazing. I go back and I listen to some of the sermons that I was preaching at Osceola and at Sturgis, Mississippi, the two churches I pastored before I came here, and even early here at Concord. And I was not quite as bold. I was not quite as passionate. And what has happened is, because I've lost that ear, it has caused me to think more about what people hear. It's caused me to try to speak a lot more precisely. And it's caused me to be more bold in sharing. So in my weakness, God's made strong. And Moses needed to understand that. And he's going to. But now, looking at verse number 10, I want you to see this. Weaknesses are real. They are real. I mean, there are certain weaknesses that we have and limitations that are just absolutely a physical thing. They're just real. You know, I will never, and have never, been able to turn around, do a 360 slam dunk with a basketball. I am vertically challenged, okay? Some of you tall guys could probably do that, but I never could. That's a limitation for me, and it's real. It's a real limitation. Moses' limitation was probably real. Notice he said there in verse number 10, he said, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since I met you, Lord. I mean, I became a follower of you, and I'm still not eloquent. Many Bible scholars believe that Moses was a stutterer, that he stuttered, and he wasn't eloquent, and he had always done that. And even after meeting the Lord, he continued to do that. So this limitation, this weakness, was absolutely real. See, those other excuses dealt with others not believing him. That was their weakness. Now he tries this excuse that focuses on his weakness. Lord, I know you're calling me, but I think you've made a mistake. I'm not able to do this. I am weak and limited. And Moses may have been absolutely right that he was a very poor communicator. But so were a lot of other people who were used by God. Let me give you this illustration. I thought this was so cool. Paul, the great apostle Paul, the writer of the epistles. Here's what he said in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. For some say, talking about himself, his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he is unimpressive and his speaking amounts to nothing. That's what they said about Paul. So evidently he was a great author, but y'all, I never heard him preach, did you? But evidently he had a lot of difficulty preaching. He couldn't preach his way out of a wet paper sack. That's the Apostle Paul. Martin Luther, that great reformer, was said to be a very poor speaker. Some said that Martin Luther had very poor eyesight, and he would hold up manuscripts right up to his face and read them. How would you like if your preacher did this every single... Some of y'all might like that better, but anyway. What about Beethoven? Beethoven's music teacher said, as a composer, he's hopeless. Beethoven's music teacher. Louisa May Alcott. Y'all remember, what books did she write? Little Women. Louisa May Alcott. It was said that she was incapable of writing anything that would have popular appeal. That's what an editor. Walt Disney was fired by a newspaper because he couldn't come up with any good ideas. Can you imagine what our world would be like if people like that gave in to their weaknesses rather than just pushing on? Rather than keep trying? keep struggling, keep going forward, how empty our world would be of the music of Beethoven, the books of Alcott, and the imagination of Walt Disney. See, here he was focused on his weakness. Our weaknesses do not weaken God. See, we got to get that out of our minds. We say sometimes on a baseball team or on any other team that the weakest link is the problem. You try to destroy the weakest link. Who's the worst hitter? Who's the worst fielder? Who's the worst defender? Who's the worst one? That's where we're going to attack. And oftentimes we think that we being the weak link, that somehow that's going to destroy God's strength. That us being weak, that I'm just so weak, that I'm so impossibly weak, that it actually is too much for God to handle. Y'all, that'll never be the case. Our weakness does not weaken him. He's still all-powerful. And no matter how weak we are, no matter how limited we are, God is still able. He's still capable. So, weaknesses are real. Look at verse 11. So the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Moses was complaining. God was telling him that wholeheartedness is required. Being wholehearted. Here, Moses was trying to shirk his responsibility. He wasn't really all in. He wasn't really totally surrendered to the Lord. And so here, God says, is it not I, the Lord? He said, Moses, think about this. If I can make a mouth, I can certainly train it to speak. If God can make the greater, then the lesser is no problem for him. Now think about that. God said, look, Moses, you're worried about how eloquent you can speak. I'm the one that gave you the mouth that you're going to use. I'm big enough and powerful enough to fill your mouth with words and to give you the ability to speak them. That's me. You have got to completely surrender. I want your wholehearted, I'm all in attitude. See, it's ability or availability. You know, natural ability can impress a lot of people. We see folks that can sing, and we see singers in every genre of music, and their natural ability is impressive. Let me just name a couple of singers. Let's see if y'all can relate. Have you ever heard of Marty Robbins? Y'all, Marty Robbins can sing. I mean, there's out in the West Texas town of El Paso. I mean, there's just the way that he sings. It's beautiful. It's eloquent. He was awesome. What about Dean Martin? Oh, yeah. Dean Martin. Amore. Yeah, I mean, there's something about his voice. Keep going, honey. It was awesome. Those guys had natural talent. Celine Dion. Whitney Houston. I'm going to go down the list. People whose voices, natural ability was totally amazing. And people would just get mesmerized listening to them. Y'all, there's some beautiful and wonderful things out there in the natural world. God created all that. God made all that. God gave those natural abilities. But those natural abilities is not what God normally chooses to use. God normally chooses supernatural availability to change people. It's those folks that are not just naturally gifted. It's those folks that are weak and the power of God overtakes them. The power of God fills them, and there's a supernatural release of them being available to God, and God uses them and people get changed. Y'all, in all reality, have you ever heard Billy Graham preach? Have you ever analyzed his sermons? Sat down and really listened? Billy Graham didn't preach any great theologically deep and expansive sermons with all kinds of sensational illustrations and all this. Billy Graham preached the most simple gospel message that you could ever hear. And literally millions of people came to Jesus. Why? Because Billy Graham totally, wholeheartedly made himself available to God, and God supernaturally used him. He didn't have the most deep, resounding voice like Adrian Rogers, or great ability like physical abilities like Billy Sunday. He didn't have those things, but he did make himself available. And God literally used him to turn the world upside down. His availability changed people. See, the ability to speak is going to come when Moses makes himself available to God. Later on, Moses speaks, doesn't he? I mean, Moses speaks with power. Moses speaks with an anointing from God. When Moses comes down off of Mount Sinai and the glow of God is about him, he spoke with authority. Why? Because he made himself available. He's going to learn that. Letting God means letting go. When you yield your weakness, you say, not just yield your strength, but when you yield your weakness, when you say, God, I can't do this, but you can. And you yield that to him. It magnifies the supernatural acts of God. How many of y'all are familiar with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes? Did y'all have that in your school when you were growing up? I got saved because of the FCA, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I became a Christian through that organization. I've been to FCA camp, and I've spoken at 2 different state FCA conventions, the one here in Arkansas and one in Mississippi, and I've served on the board for FCA. So this story that I want to tell you, I'm very, very familiar with. There's a guy named James Jeffries. Now, James Jeffrey was the 3rd president of FCA, and he was a very awesome speaker. He was energetic. He was powerful as he spoke. He literally held people's attention. Now, his son, Neil, not so much. Neil Jeffrey actually stuttered, had a horrible stutter. And he was so self-conscious about getting up in front of people. He would go and help his father at FCA conventions and FCA meetings and FCA rallies, and he was always there. Man, he loved the Lord. But don't ask him to speak. Well, one certain convention, they asked Neil Jeffrey to speak. And he was floored. He said, I can't do it. I can't do it. Well, at the encouragement of his father, he finally decided, I need to get rid of this. I need to just trust the Lord. I need to do this for Jesus. And he stood up in front of over 1,000 athletes were gathered at this FCA convention. And he stood there. And no one had ever heard him speak publicly like that. So when he began to speak and he stuttered, they all began to laugh. They thought it was a joke. And he kept on. And he just kept on. And then everybody in the room realized that this wasn't a joke. And they began to listen. And when he closed the message that night and gave the invitation, there were more young men that got saved that night than any other convention that had ever taken place. What they saw was a man who had his weaknesses, but he gave them to God. He trusted the Lord, made himself available, and God, through his weakness, showed his mighty power. I believe that's what Moses is going to learn, is that God could use him in his weakness, but he's got to surrender it. You can't let your weakness keep you from trusting God. And then look at verse number 12. God said, now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. I'm going to help you with your impediment. I'm going to help you overcome that weakness, but also I'm going to not only allow your mouth to work, but I'm going to fill it. You're not going to have to worry about what to say. You're not going to have to worry about being eloquent. I'm going to give you words, Moses. Here, it was a question of willingness and receptiveness. Willingness on Moses' part and receptiveness on Moses' part. He had to have an attitude of being willing, and he had to have an openness to receive the work and the ministry of the Lord himself. So he had to have the right attitude, and he had to have the right heart. He had to have this of being willing. I'm willing to hear, but I'm receptive, God, to what you said. Here is the real issue. Moses, are you willing and are you teachable? Are you willing and are you teachable? See, some folks are willing, but they have to do it their way. Oh, I see this job that needs to be performed. I'm willing to get in there, but I'm going to do it my way. Yeah, I want to help with that project, but I've got to be a leader. I'll help with that project, but I've got to be the one that does. I'll help with cooking. I'll help with Thanksgiving dinner, but I've got to do the turkey. There are folks who are willing, but there's some that aren't coachable. They're not willing to be led. They're not willing to follow the leadership of someone else. And so Moses needed to understand that. Moses could say, yes, Lord, I'll do it, but God, I got to do it my way. God said, no, I'm going to make your mouth work, but I'm also going to fill it. I'm going to tell you what to say. You need to be receptive to that. Willingness to follow through, that's obedience, and a teachable spirit. Anyone with these can be used by God to do great things. Back when I was in high school, I had one of my best friends, great athlete, still holds several high school records in football and baseball and basketball. Fabulous athlete. Had scholarship offers in many big, at that time it was Southwestern Conference, some of the schools, Oklahoma, Texas, all of them called him. He went to Arkansas Tech. That's close to Mama. And so he went to Tech. Oh, great athlete. But when he got to Arkansas Tech, he realized he was no longer the big fish in the little pond. Now he was just an average fish in a bigger pond. And he realized that his natural ability was not going to carry him much further. He was going to have to learn some new things. And the coach had a plan for him. Coach Harold Steelman was the coach at Arkansas Tech at the time, and he had some plans for Dennis. Dennis could have continued to grow if he would have allowed Coach Steelman to coach him. If he would have opened up and listened, he could have grown. But he already had it figured out. He'd been riding on his natural ability all of these years, and his natural ability had gotten him so far, but he would not listen to coaching. And he wound up dropping out and never going ahead and playing. Could have been possibly a professional athlete in any one of those three sports, but he was uncoachable. That's a horrible thing for somebody who has been so gifted by God and has gotten so many, just God all over them, and God wanting to use them, and they surrender to a certain point. They say, Lord, I'm available, but I'm going to do it my way. And they're uncoachable. Many, many believers never quite fulfill the complete calling of God because they don't let God coach them. So here, God says, I want you to be willing, Moses, to be coached. But then, there's also a question. How bad do you really want it? How bad, Christian, do you really want to serve God? How bad do you really want to be used by God? Has it become a passion in your heart that you really want to fulfill the calling of God in your life? How bad do you want it? If we really want to please God, nothing's going to stop us. Nothing. A focus on our weaknesses can keep us from a productive ministry. Here's my illustration. Back in the late 1800s, out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, there was a group of vaudeville ladies named the Cherry Sisters. Now, you can go back, look this up, okay? Find Wikipedia. They'll tell you all kinds of good stuff. The Cherry Sisters. They decided that they were going to be great vaudeville entertainers. And so they wrote little songs, they wrote a little play, they had all their costumes, and they decided that they were going to be famous. And so they all of a sudden started their program right there in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And for 3 years, they packed theaters all throughout the Midwest. But they had to perform behind a chicken wire screen. You know why? You know why they performed all over the Midwest for over 3 years? Not because they were so good, but because they were so horrible. I mean, people booked them just so folks could come and throw vegetables at them, okay? It was a big joke. And they even wound up going to New York City and spent some time on Broadway doing their show. And to the day they died, they never believed that they were horrible. They thought they were great. Oh my goodness. They did. They thought they were wonderful. Have y'all watched American Idol? And you've seen some of the folks that come there, and they come and to be checked out, and they think, oh man, I'm wonderful, and they're horrible. That's who these Cherry Sisters were. They wound up, when they finally quit entertaining, they had over $200,000 in the bank. And this is in the late 1800s. They couldn't sing, they couldn't act, they couldn't perform, they couldn't write plays, but they were committed to do it. And they're famous. Some of y'all are going to go look them up as soon as we get done. They've been dead 100 years, but you're still going to go check them out, right? That ought to be a lesson for us. If we really want to please God, nothing can stop us. Amen. Nothing. No matter our limitations, no matter our weaknesses, nothing can stop us. Our weaknesses will not hinder God's work. Only our lack of will can do it. The only thing that hinders God's work is when we decide that we're not going to be able to do it and we quit on God. Strengths develop as we yield ourselves to do His will. That's where our strengths come, is when we yield to Him. Our weaknesses are not a valid excuse for not serving God. Sometimes we say, God, I can't teach a class because I'm not smart. God, I can't work in the preschool. I can't work with the children. I'm too old. I'm too weak. I'm too tired. I can't do it. And so we use our weaknesses to get out of serving the Lord. And God's telling us, yes, you can. Yes, you can. God's saying, you could do this. Trust me, I'm going to help you. I'll give you the words. I'll fill your mouth, and I'll give you the ability. Just trust me. But we just keep saying no. We don't make ourselves available, and we follow our weaknesses rather than following Him. Don't let your preconceived ideas, don't let your weaknesses keep you from letting God be strong, okay? I don't know how this might apply to you tonight. But would you stand, and Larry's going to come, and I want to just give you the opportunity to respond however the Lord might have spoken to you tonight. You may have been thinking the whole time I was speaking, you know, preacher, I just don't think I can I just don't think I have the ability. I just don't think that I can be used by God. I don't think there's anything I can do for the Lord.